Bonjour. Tengo el placer.
I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Aziz Akhannouch, Head of Government of the Kingdom of Morocco. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Mr. President, Your Excellency, Secretary General, Excellencies, Majesties, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. President, on behalf of the delegation of the Kingdom of Morocco on your election to preside over this session. We wish you all success in your endeavors, and we commend the work undertaken by your predecessor, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, and we commend the outcomes of his presidency. We reiterate our support to the efforts of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, aiming at reforming our organization. We assure him of our support and of supporting his initiatives and proposals contained in his report entitled Our Common Agenda. President, the 77th session of the General Assembly convenes while our world is witnessing multidimensional crises with global intertwined repercussions. 3 years after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, our world is facing a series of deep and successive challenges and crises. What is preventing us from effectively managing these crises is not the fact that we are not aware of its manifestations and interactions. It is rather the lack of a true political will. The multilateral system is currently witnessing a crisis that we can clearly see on 3 interdependent levels. The first level has to do with the crisis of values. The principle of cooperation and solidarity on which the United Nations was established is being undermined. Narrow national interests are given the priority over global humanitarian values. The second level has to do with divisions within international institutions. These institutions have become a theater of a competition that is negatively affecting multilateral global work. The third level relates to the fragmentation of multilateral work in the frame of narrow circumstantial alliances that are not commensurate with the current complicated crisis. The current international circumstances require courage and objectivity in order to answer the following questions. Do we want our organization to be capable of leading the strategic changes and facing the major challenges of our times, or do we want the organization to limit itself to crisis management? Is our organization still capable of reaching a global consensus and finding innovative solutions to tackle the current and future challenges? We would like to say here that those who believe that their own capabilities are enough to contain these challenges are not being realistic. Multilateral work was never a luxury, and the crises we are witnessing today affirm this and prove that the security and prosperity of some depends on the stability and prosperity of all. The Kingdom of Morocco reaffirms its belief that multilateral work should be based on collective interaction and on a consensual approach. This was reaffirmed by His Majesty the King Mohammed VI in his statement before the 59th General Assembly of the United Nations when he said, Morocco reaffirms its commitment to pursue its work to establish a new global order, a multilateral order based on justice, international legitimacy, solidarity and equality in social and economic relations, and on effectiveness and dynamism in the UN mission. President, the African continent is the most affected by the spillovers of the current difficult economic circumstances that were the result of the global geopolitical crisis. The African continent is bearing the brunt of the increase in the prices of food and energy commodities, which is undermining the gains we have achieved in sustainable development. Despite all that, we find in Africa all the components to turn challenges into opportunities and to emerge from this crisis stronger than ever. The African continent has important human and natural resources, besides the future gains and benefits it can achieve by implementing the African Free Trade Agreement. This was reaffirmed by His Majesty the King in his statement before the 28th Summit of the African Union, when he said, "We, the peoples of Africa, have the means and the genius, and we also have the capability of working collectively to answer the ambitions of our peoples." In this context, the Kingdom of Morocco calls for promoting international cooperation to serve the interest of African countries by reducing the debt burden and launching development initiatives that would enhance our capacities and allow us to resist the shocks of future and current economic crises. The repeated visits of His Majesty the King to several African countries embody this conviction. His Majesty launched several cooperation and partnership projects aiming at promoting human development, guaranteeing food security, and bolstering economic growth in order to achieve African integration. The Kingdom of Morocco, under the auspices of His Majesty the King, have hosted the 14th African American Business Summit to encourage the investment flows to priority sectors in the African countries. Mr. President, several countries are still suffering from the spillovers of COVID-19. The challenge lies in providing regular and sufficient vaccine supply and distributing equitably these vaccines among all peoples and countries. Out of his commitment to our African belonging, His Majesty the King launched a new factory for manufacturing COVID-19 and other vaccines. This is a structural project that would allow us to achieve vaccine sovereignty in the Kingdom of Morocco and in all of the African continent to implement the vision of His Majesty. The pandemic has shown that good health and prosperity are not only among the Sustainable Development Goals. Good health and prosperity are sine qua non conditions and the pillars of sustainable development. Therefore, the government is implementing and expanding health coverage. This has allowed us to cover 70% of our people, and we hope to reach a coverage of 100% by the end of this year. Mr. President, climate change requires immediate and urgent solutions away from statements of intention. We need to contain this crisis, which jeopardizes development all over the world and might lead to famine, displacement, and to climate migration. In this context, the Kingdom of Morocco, in line with the vision of His Majesty the King, has been warning of the consequences of the climate crisis on the African continent. The African continent too was mostly affected by the climate change. Therefore, it is up to the developed countries to mobilize the necessary technological and financial resources to support the African states and to allow them to face the consequences of this global challenge. The Kingdom has decided to increase its nationally determined contribution and to reduce the greenhouse gases by 45.5% by 2030. This is part of the integrated strategy of Morocco to achieve a low-carbon development by 2050. This strategy aims at creating a green economy in line with the principles of sustainability. These are the pillars on which we have built the new development model in the Kingdom. This ambition is also why the Kingdom of Morocco is implementing its commitments, the commitments that we had agreed upon in the Marrakesh summit of 2016, which convened on the margin of COP22 under the presidency of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, especially with regards to developing the capabilities of the agricultural sector and the resistance to climate change. Mr. President, global tensions negatively impact the efforts that are being deployed to achieve food security unless countries develop their internal capabilities in a way that takes into account this new reality. In this context, Morocco has been investing in the agricultural sector to allow it to adapt to climate change. We have been enhancing South-South cooperation with the African continent, which is the continent where we find half of the arable land worldwide. Unfortunately, this arable land hasn't been exploited fully so far. On the national level, Morocco is implementing the Green Generation Plan in line with the directives of His Majesty the King to achieve food security. Mr. President, the global security crisis directly affects the movement of people worldwide. The Kingdom of Morocco, in line with the vision of His Majesty the King, is committed to the Global Compact for a safe, regular and orderly migration, which was signed in Marrakesh in December 2018. In this context, the Kingdom will show all solidarity in implementing its national strategy for migration and asylum, which was launched by His Majesty in 2013. In the same vein, Morocco will go on fighting human trafficking networks, which represent a serious threat to the sovereignty and stability of states and to the security and safety of individuals. Mr. President, peacekeeping is one of the most important missions of our organization. Hence, the need to unite our efforts and to work on developing this mission and guaranteeing the safety of the peace workers. Out of his commitment to peacekeeping, His Majesty the King, on the occasion of the 66th anniversary of the creation of the armed forces, gave his instructions to establish a Moroccan multidisciplinary center for peacekeeping that would train and support national and foreign capacity, especially on the African continent, in partnership with the United Nations and some friendly countries to promote the principles of international peace and security. Mr. President, gender equality and the promotion of the rights of women and her full participation in decision-making are preconditions to tackle the current and future global challenges. In line with this principle, and in line with the vision of His Majesty the King, the Kingdom of Morocco is working on the promotion of equality between genders as a basis for a fair and democratic society. His Majesty has given a new momentum to gender equality through the implementation of the provisions of the Family Code. The Kingdom has also launched the first National Plan of Action for Women, Peace and Security as an integrated political framework in implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1325, out of our belief in the importance of the full participation of women in preventing and settling conflicts. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco reiterates its commitment to finding a final political solution to the artificial regional conflict around the Moroccan Sahara. This solution should be based on the Moroccan initiative for self-determination as a sole solution for this conflict, and while respecting the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the kingdom. In the frame of this realistic and serious initiative, since it was submitted in 2007, the initiative was supported by the Security Council and by more than 90 states. The kingdom in the southern regions is implementing new development models that was launched by His Majesty the King in 2015. All the dwellers of the region are fully engaging in all the implementation stages of this development plan through their democratically elected representatives in the Moroccan Sahara Councils. The active participation of the Moroccan Sahara dwellers their participation in the political, social, and economic life attests to their attachment to the Moroccan belonging of the Sahara. The Kingdom of Morocco reiterates, as per the statement of His Majesty the King on the occasion of the 46th of the anniversary of the 46th Green March, their full support to the efforts of the Secretary General to launch the series of roundtables in the same format and with the same participants in order to reach a realistic and lasting political solution based on consensus and in line with the Security Council resolutions, namely the most recent resolution 2602. The participation of Algeria. The serious and well-intentioned participation of Algeria in these roundtables and its recognition of its responsibility in creating and pursuing this artificial conflict is the first condition to reach a final political settlement to this issue. The Kingdom of Morocco expresses once again its grave concern over the catastrophic humanitarian situation and the absence of the rule of law in the Tindouf camps. Algeria, in a blatant violation of international humanitarian law, has ceded its responsibilities over this part of its land to armed separatist militias, which have documented links to dangerous terrorist networks in the Sahel region. Once again, we call upon the international community to urge Algeria to answer the calls of the Security Council since 2011 and allow the UNHCR to organize a census and register the dwellers of the Tindouf camps. Mr. President, His Majesty the King assured His Excellency Mr. Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine, in a letter he sent him on the 20th of December 2020, he reiterated the steadfast Moroccan position supporting the Palestinian cause and calling for the two-state solution that is agreed upon internationally, and reiterated our attachment to negotiations between the two parties, Palestinian and Israeli parties, to reach a final, lasting and comprehensive settlement to this conflict. In his capacity as President of the Jerusalem Committee of the OIC, His Majesty reaffirmed that Morocco will spare no effort to safeguard the historical identity of Jerusalem as a land of coexistence and peace, and that he will go on defending the special status of Jerusalem and respecting the freedom of religion for the followers of the three monotheistic religions and protecting the sanctity to improving the living conditions of the Palestinians. His Majesty the King led a mediation which culminated in an agreement on opening Al-Nabi Bridge, the bridge of King Hussein, which links between the West Bank and Jordan. This will have positive impacts on the daily life of Palestinians and will facilitate the movement of persons and commodities. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Morocco, out of our common destiny with the state of Libya and to build on the positive momentum which was created by the Skhirat Agreement and the Buznika talks, will pursue its efforts to reach a peaceful settlement to this conflict in this brotherly country in line with the vision of His Majesty the King. We are committed that the solution to the crisis in Libya should be Libyan-led without any interference or any foreign agenda. The Kingdom of Morocco welcomes the designation of Mr. Batili as Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General and Head of the Support Mission in Libya and reaffirms its full commitment to work with him and to effectively contribute to the efforts that are made so that the Libyan stakeholders reach the necessary agreements and organize parliamentary and presidential elections as a sole means to overcome the current situation. Mr. President, the scope of the current challenges require one of two choices: either disregarding the crises of our current world or intensifying our efforts to deal with these crises positively and effectively. Our collective decisions would have a decisive impact on the current and future of the current and future generations. The Kingdom of Morocco, in line with the vision of His Majesty the King, and as we have done since we joined the United Nations upon our independence, will remain committed to our commitments. May the peace of God be upon you.
And we were watching live the statements of Aziz Akhannouch, head of government of the Kingdom of Morocco. Akhannouch said the world faces deep and successive crises 3 years after the COVID pandemic started, adding that what prevents the world to take action is not a lack of knowledge, but a lack of political will. Morocco reaffirmed its commitment to build a multilateral world. Stay tuned with teleSUR. We will provide more updates in upcoming news briefs.